Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot we have Ernest Hemingway. Ernest is of course one of the most renowned writers in history, but let's start off his story in the late 1950s. During this time, Ernest was, for the first time, having trouble with his writings and needed a little assistance. According to those he asked for help, during this time he seemed a little disoriented and confused, some might even say a little paranoid as he was worried about being followed by the FBI, which apparently later after his death would come out to be true to some degree, but that's an entirely different story. In December of 1960, Hemingway was admitted to the Mayo Clinic using a fake name. He would stay there for 2 months under the guise of being treated for hypertension, but it is said that he was really there for help with his depression. Apparently here he underwent electroshock therapy at least 15 times. He was released later with a clean bill of health, but sadly he would continue on a downward spiral. In April, his wife Mary found him holding his shotgun in a self-menacing way, which left him being rushed to the hospital again and being treated with the same electroshock therapy. Just days before his death, while on a trip, the plane stopped to refuel and Ernest tried to walk right into the plane propellers, which thankfully a pilot was able to stop just before it happened. On July 2nd, 1961, Ernest would go on to take his own life with his shotgun. We now know that Hemingway suffered from severe depression, paranoid delusions, and bipolar disease, exacerbated by a history of alcoholism, severe head injuries, and a genetic disorder of iron metabolism known as hemochromatosis, and we also know that 7 of his close family members also passed away in the same way as he did, including his father, sister, brother, and later, his granddaughter.
Coming at number 9 with Giuseppe Tartini. This is really how you reach legendary status. Just like Robert Johnson, you want to be a person so good at your craft that the only way people can justify it is by saying that you made a deal with the devil, that you are so unreal at ripping down what you do that you must have done some dirty work to get that good. That's what I want from my life. I want people to be like, this dude was for sure on some performance enhancers, or he was using black magic, because there's no way that anyone could be that good at what this guy did. That's what happened with Giuseppe. This dude was ripping through the violin so good that people were like, the devil must have hooked him up with some good juice. People thought that he could have had 6 fingers on one hand that allowed him to play notes that no one else could ever play. The story goes that Giuseppe woke up and the devil was sitting on the edge of his bed just ripping the violin. Like, the dude was so legendary at the violin that Giuseppe was awestruck. Then the devil just vanished. Giuseppe quickly wrote down everything he could remember from the song, and that became the Devil's Trill Sonata. It blew people away and everyone was breaking down to that song. It was so sick. But Giuseppe said the song that the devil played was even more legendary and was super lit. Those were his exact words. Coming in at number 8, we have Christian Bale, one of the greatest actors of our generation. How does he do it? Well, it must be the devil. I'm starting to see a pattern here. It seems like back in the day, people used to say the best people must have sold their soul to the devil in order to become great, because how else could they do it? Nowadays, if you become rich and famous, you are part of the Illuminati, which worships the devil. I mean, it's the only logical answer, right? It's not like people just work really hard and then they are able to achieve things that no other person ever could. There's no way that these speculations could be coming from people who haven't achieved anything of substance, looking up at the people above them and then creating insane dialogue so they can cope with their inadequacies. No, that could never be the case, but in the case of Christian Bale, he did actually thank the devil in one of his Golden Globe speeches, which is pretty sus. I mean, he was probably just trying to stir the pot because he knows that people will freak out if he says something like that, or maybe the dude does believe in the devil. I don't know. Alright, coming in the next spot, we have Johann Faust. Unlike the other people on this list so far, this dude is a legendary bad guy. Faust was a teacher, professor, and one of the smartest people of his generation. He was alive in the 1500s, and back then he had one goal and one goal only. That was to become the smartest man alive. He wanted people to bow down to him and his genius, and he wanted the recognition that he believed he deserved. Because of this, he had an ego the size of Jupiter and thought that everyone was beneath him. He would beat his students, and he was known for being rude to everyone around him. Now, I don't know if it's because this guy was so mean or if it's because he was really into magic, but people thought that he was working with the devil. I guess if you're mean and you like magic, there would be nothing stopping you from getting into the dark arts. People even thought that this guy's dog was a demon, that it walked around, a demonic dog, and tried to attack people, and when no one was looking, it would morph into a human that would serve Faust. Eventually the dude died, and it was the spectacular fashion in which this dude died which solidified him as someone who worked with the devil. His lab exploded and the dude died in a ball of flames. The rumor says says that there was a pair of hoof prints burned into the floorboards. Coming number 6, we have NICCOLO Paganini. Man, back in the day, if you could rip the violin that good, people thought you must have been up to some funny business. There is no way you could get that good just off of skill and hard work, no way at all. NICCOLO Paganini was very young when he picked up the violin. At only age 11, he would touch the instrument for the first time, and right away it would seem that he was destined to be one of the best in the world. When he was still a teenager, he was performing in front of hundreds of people. This guy was definitely a prodigy, but as we have learned, the theme of this list is that people can't trust you if you start to get too good. So there was talk that this dude sold his soul to the devil. People said that he would perform rituals to make himself more powerful, and that he even used dark magic to infuse a soul into his violin so it would sound even more beautiful. People say they saw the devil come out of him and stand next to him when he played. The kicker to this was that he didn't want to be blessed before he died. This was something that was very common back in the day. People wanted a priest to give them some sort of magic so they could go up and hang out with God, but Paganini denied this. Maybe because he knew he was going to hell and it was going to be way cooler and way more fun than going to heaven. Coming in number 5, we have Jimmy Page, once again hitting it with a legendary musician. It would be no surprise that the lead guitarist of Led Zeppelin, one of the greatest rock bands in the world, has suspicions circling around him that he made a deal with the devil. I mean, when rock and roll was coming up, everyone was saying that it was the devil's music. Well, then the devil has great taste, that's all I'm saying. But there's a little more juice to this than Republicans in the 70s being afraid that music was going to bring the end of the world. The thing is, Jimmy was actually a huge fan of the occult and apparently was very open about following the teachings to try and get better at guitar. Hey man, if you're trying to make it to the top, there isn't really anything wrong you can do as long as you're not hurting anyone. Cast a spell from a book to make those fingers move as fast as you can so you're always on the cutting edge of music. And all this came together when apparently you could hear the devil speak when you played Stairway to Heaven backwards. Yeah, I don't think that is true, but people love to think that the devil is hiding in rock and roll. Coming in number 4, we have Snoop Dogg. Yeah, Snoop D-O-double-G. This dude is a legend. Could you imagine you're so much of a legend that you became one of the best rappers of all time? You started popping into movies, you changed your name to Snoop Lion for a bit, you become a commentator for a Mike Tyson fight, and you become best friends with Martha Stewart after she goes to jail. This dude has lived a life that would put most people to shame. Now, how has he been able to be so legendary? Was it skill? Was it luck? Was it coming up with his own language that people would actually learn to speak? Well, no, it was of course a deal with the devil, guys. Apparently in a song, Snoop talks about a voice coming into him and telling him to make a deal, and if he took the deal, he would live eternal and forever. Not a bad deal if you ask me. Coming in number 3, we have URBAIN Grandier. It should be no surprise that the church has some weird things going on inside its walls. I mean, we know that it's full of creeps today that are doing horrible things, so someone who worships the devil is kind of small potatoes compared to the other things that are going on. Now, URBAIN was ahead of his time when it came to being a horrible person in the church. He was apparently summoning the devil all the time and had magical powers. He would put curses on people he didn't like, and there was even a contract found that was said to be signed by the devil, and it was used against him in court. Could you imagine today, someone finds a fake contract and then they use it against you to put you in prison? Lol, that is great. Coming in number 2, we have Antonio Rose. This case of selling your soul to the devil was so famous that it impacted the culture of witches forever. So Rose was living back in the 1400s, and she wasn't doing well. She was trying to take care of her kid, but her husband had left, so she had to do whatever she could to try and keep this kid alive. Apparently the stress of just trying to stay alive started to wear on her, and she started to indulge in psychedelic drugs that you could rub on your skin. She was seen rubbing it on a broom handle and then riding it like you see witches do in popular culture today. Eventually people started to make claims that she was a witch and working with the devil when she attacked someone who came close to her home. She was arrested and convicted of being a witch and selling her soul to the devil. And coming at the number 1 spot, we have John Moulton. Now this one takes the number 1 spot just because it's funny. Apparently John Moulton was ready to sell his soul to the devil, but he had a plan. See, if you look through the history of the devil, he isn't the hardest dude to outsmart. John made a deal with the Prince of Darkness that he would sell his soul. The devil came and filled his boots with gold. The devil was like, heck yes, but then the devil came to do his job and he found that Moulton had put his boots at the top of a chimney and cut out the bottoms. Basically, if the devil wanted to fill the boots with gold, he would have had to fill the whole chimney. And the devil hates being tricked, so he burned his house down. Basically, it's the same thing when traders on Wall Street bets learn how to make money off of the stock market, and then Robin Hood stopped them from trading because the devil can never lose.
Starting off at our number 10 spot, we have Michelangelo. Perhaps one of the most famous artists in history, as well as my favorite Ninja Turtle, Michelangelo's hand is said to have been touched by both genius, but also madness. He's the creator of one of the most treasured art pieces as he painted the Sistine Chapel. While this is his most coveted piece, he also produced a mass amount of works throughout his life, all with meticulous detail. This has led some historians to speculate that he may have struggled with some form of obsessive-compulsive disorder. Throughout his works, many have also drawn conclusions that he may have been severely depressed, potentially with symptoms of bipolar disorder as well. It is said that Michelangelo would often shut himself away for days at a time while he works, oftentimes forgetting to eat or change his clothes. We can get a glimpse into the life of Michelangelo both from his own personal notes that survived after his passing, as well as through other art from the time that depicts him. One really striking piece that is left from Michelangelo is a note that he wrote to his father, in which he is said to have written, quote, "I lead a miserable existence and reck not of life nor honor that is of this world. I live wearied by stupendous labors and beset by 1,000 anxieties, and thus I lived for some 15 years now, and never an hour's happiness have I had." In our number 9 spot today, we have Edgar Degas. Edgar Degas is known as one of the most influential artists of the 19th century thanks to his incredible creations that are full of lighthearted scenes. These creations, however, are a stark contrast to what is said about the life of Edgar himself. For a lot of his life, Edgar apparently was quite introverted, and this left him hiding away at his studio for most days, while he would only walk the streets of Paris at night. He had a small circle of people that he liked and trusted, and outside of that, he completely closed himself off. In the 1880s, Edgar began to really suffer from bouts of depression and also aimlessness, and in 1884, in a letter, he wrote, quote, "I'm blocked, impotent, I've lost the thread." In the last years of his life, Edgar unfortunately lost his eyesight, which would only prove to further isolate the artist. This, coupled with how it left him unable to create art in the same way he once did, would be a blow to anyone, but for someone like Edgar, it was devastating. In our number 8 spot today, we have Richard Dadd. Known for his painting of supernatural scenes, Richard Dadd is another artist who really suffered with his mental health. The detail-focused painter is said to have first had a sort of psychotic episode or mental health crisis while on a boat on the River Nile. It is said that during this period he was thrashing about and claimed to have thought that the ancient Egyptian god Osiris had taken a hold of his mind. Later, when he returned to England, his health would only get worse, and sadly this would turn fatal. Richard would go on to believe that his dad was the devil, which resulted in him taking the lives of his parents. After this, he fled to France, where he attempted to take another life, this time of a tourist. He of course was caught and ended up being sent to a psychiatric hospital, and it is actually there that he created many of his best known masterpieces. Our best modern guess of what was happening within Richard and his mind is that he was suffering from paranoid schizophrenia, which some say he may have been genetically prone to, but at this point it isn't quite clear. In our number 7 spot today, we have Andy Warhol. When it came to Andy Warhol, whether it was silk screens featuring 100 Marilyn Monroes or 210 Coca-Cola bottles, he loved multiplicity in every area of his life. When asked about how he decorated his home, he shared, quote, "Just with junk, paper and boxes, things I bring home and leave around and never pick up." While many see this as the quirky artist being, well, quirky, when we look further into his life, we see and understand things from a different lens. It is said that even his art shows his engrossment with abundance. He was comfortable with abundance. So hoarding, which is a persistent inability to part with belongings, is classified as a disorder, and it's clearly different from collecting because these items aren't displayed or specifically collected. Another part of hoarding is in relation to the distress that hoarders feel, which is something that Andy himself wrote about when he said, quote, "I'm so sick of the way I live, all of this junk and always dragging more home, just white walls and a clean floor. That's all I want. We often overlook things like this, like hoarding, because of TLC shows that make it seem much more trivial than it is, but it is clear from his life and all of the things found after his death that Andy too was suffering, just maybe in a different way than some of the others on this list. In our number 6 spot today we have Joan Miro. Joan was a Spanish painter, sculptor, and ceramicist who received international acclaim for his surrealist works, although his style is a bit difficult to truly pin down. Behind his loved art, however, was the artist who was suffering from depression for most of his life. It is said that he would weave in and out of the bouts like many other people also experience as well. In interviews from the 1930s and later, it is said that he also expressed a sort of contempt for conventional painting methods, calling it a way of supporting the bourgeois society. Apparently, a low period in his life is actually what ended up leading him to a life of art, however. A bad bout of depression coupled with a bad bout of typhus is what the artist needed to encourage him to drop out of business studies and pursue art instead. In our number 5 spot today we have Jackson Pollock. Jackson was an American painter and figure who was important for the abstract expressionist movement. Many people know him for his famous drip technique and just his unusual but fantastic entire technique and approach to painting in general. Of course, this technique doesn't tickle everyone's fancy, some didn't appreciate the effect it had, but hey, art is certainly subjective. Aside from his polarizing style, Jackson is said to have been quite reclusive as well as a bit volatile. It is reported that he struggled with alcoholism for a fair share of his life, and in 1938 he suffered a nervous breakdown. Sadly, Jackson's struggle with alcohol led to his untimely death at age 44 after he passed away in a single car accident where he was the driver. It serves as a reminder to us all that alcoholism certainly is an illness as well, and it isn't one to take lightly either. In our number 4 spot today we have YANNOULIS. This sculptor is known for his incredible modern Greek art, but he is also known for his debilitating mental health struggles. It is said that for years he would create something but then destroy it almost immediately. It is said that in 1878 he suffered a nervous breakdown, and on top of his habit of destroying his creations, he began to also attempt to take his own life. Apparently his hardships were only later exacerbated by his mother, who blamed his illness on his sculptures, which led her to try and keep him away from them. It is no doubt that he lived quite a difficult life, but on top of everything we've already talked about, he was also diagnosed with dementia at just age 36. In 1916 it is said that his mother passed away, which finally allowed him to go back to sculpting and to the work. He did so after a long time of inactivity, and many experts now agree that these creations were made with more freedom than his previous ones. In our number 3 spot today we have Paul Gauguin. Paul was an extremely influential artist, and he was also a good friend of someone who was on the first part of this list, the infamous Vincent van Gogh. Paul worked with multiple mediums. He could paint, sculpt, he used ceramics, prints, and more. He worked to help develop renowned styles and movements. This is all to say that he was a brilliant creator and artist who did so much for art, all while having his own personal struggles. Not only did he suffer from severe bouts of depression, but he is also said to have at one point attempted to take his own life. Paul is another artist who is severely underappreciated until after his death, which is certainly a tragedy and an all too familiar story. In our number 2 spot today we have Sylvia Plath. Sylvia's poetry helped to shape 20th century literature, even though she didn't leave a massive body of work behind. Her simple but extremely powerful words created such imagery, and those works often alluded to her own personal struggles with her mental health. Sylvia is said to have first attempted to take her own life at just age 20, after which she was diagnosed with depression. After this, she would continually go through major bouts of depression like many others do. After her death, the poetry collection Ariel would be released, and within it there would be multiple references to experiences in her life that frustrated her and in the end led her to take her own life. At just 30 years old, Sylvia would pass away in this manner, but not without leaving a legacy behind that, heartbreakingly, many people can strongly relate to. In our number 1 spot today we have Virginia Woolf. Virginia is undoubtedly a literary giant and is known for being a leading voice in the sort of stream of consciousness style that is seen in novels like To the Lighthouse and Mrs. Dalloway. Behind her artistry and brilliance, however, is quite an interesting personal life that is riddled with struggles and hardships. Virginia had a lifelong struggle with her mental health, and this was seen in her periods of severe depression, as well as more than one attempt at taking her own life, which in the end would be the way she passed away at just 59 years old. Many people point towards a horrific event she endured early on in life as the source of her mental health struggles, and while that that is potentially quite likely, it's impossible to pin one point or one moment or series of moments in a person's life that could lead them to have struggles such as Virginia's. It is clear, however, that this of course did affect her, and by her own account was something she carried with her for her entire life. It is something that led her to become an advocate for protecting children who were vulnerable to similar circumstances. While she was still reeling from and struggling with her own experiences, she dedicated herself to helping others, the sign of a truly incredible person.
Coming in at number 10, Robert Johnson. One of the most famous situations of someone selling their soul to the devil. It would seem that he kind of got a raw deal, because even though this dude became one of the best jazz players of all time, he died at 27. Dude, if I'm selling my soul to the devil, you better believe that I'm going to want to live a full life. Like, you get my soul for eternity after I die. The least you can do is let me enjoy the deal until I'm in my 90s, and I want to be a good 90. Like, I want to be able to run around like I'm Jack LaLanne. But rumor has it that Johnson was horrible at the guitar before he made his deal with the devil. Back then when he played music, it was so bad that cats would scream and people would throw stuff at him. Then he left for a while, went to the mysterious crossroads, and came back a god of the guitar. He might have just found a teacher who was willing to show him how to use the tools that he was given that unlock his God-given powers to play the axe like a legend. Or maybe he did go down the easy road and got the devil to hook him up with some unholy powers to juice the whole thing up a little bit. Either way, if I was him, I would have played into the rumor, because it would have made you more popular. Everyone would want to come see the man who sold his soul to the devil to play like a god. They would want to know what the devil could give you.
In our number 9 spot today, we have Georgia O'Keeffe. Georgia O'Keeffe is best known for her struggle and work to get women's art the recognition it deserves, and she really was one of the pioneers for this kind of representation. She would become one of the United States' most celebrated artists, but it didn't come without obstacles. While she passed away in 1986 at the age of 98 years old, her work, legacy, and message continues to live on. One of the most well-known stories about Georgia, however, happened in 1932. It is said that at that time, Georgia was working on a mural for the Radio City Music Hall, but she had unfortunately fallen very behind on the important project due to factors that were completely beyond her control. The stress and pressure of this, along with other things she was dealing with in her personal life, caused Georgia to suffer a nervous breakdown or a mental health crisis. It is said that she became very depressed, and some even claimed that she became agoraphobic, she stopped eating, and that she struggled to not cry. Luckily, Georgia would later be hospitalized and would receive the help that she really needed at that point in time. It took some healing and a 2-year break, but she was able to finally rekindle her love for making art. In our number 8 spot today, we have Mark Rothko. Mark was born in Latvia, but he grew up in Portland, Oregon, and spent much of his adult life as an abstract painter living in New York City. He is said to have often suffered through bouts of depression while also struggling with a dependency on alcohol. Many people have explained that witnessing him paint is a masterpiece, just like the art itself. It is said that it is sort of like a mystical, meditative experience. It is said that in early 1968, Mark was diagnosed with a mild aortic aneurysm, but that he ignored the advice of his doctor and continued to drink and smoke. He avoided exercise and didn't have the best of diets. A friend of Mark's, Dor Ashton, is said to have referenced Mark at the time as being, quote, highly nervous, thin, and restless. Sadly, on February 25th, 1970, Mark would be found by his assistant lying dead in his kitchen in front of the sink. Unfortunately, it appears that at the age of 66, Mark took his own life. It is clear that despite the colorful and joyful pieces that Mark was creating, he clearly was facing a multitude of his own personal struggles that one wouldn't see in his art. His story and legacy lives on, as he is considered one of the most influential modern abstract expressionists in history. In our number 7 spot today, we have Louis Wain. Louis is quite well known for his paintings of the feline form, as he had these interesting anthropomorphic paintings of cats. It is said that later in his life, Louis began to suffer from a type of schizophrenia, which began to manifest as distrust and hostility towards his loved ones. Prior to his diagnosis, however, Louis was already struggling with his mental health after the passing of his wife to breast cancer. It is said that, as one can imagine, this caused Louis to become very depressed, and suddenly his art was his main focus. After being diagnosed with schizophrenia in 1924, his sisters felt as though they could not cope with his erratic and potentially violent behavior, and they had him committed to a mental facility. Since Louis's passing, many psychologists have reviewed his work and explained that you can see the progression of his struggle with his illness unfolding in the abstract nature of his paintings. In our number 6 spot today we have Francisco Goya. Francisco and his art was presented to the world at an interesting point in time. He was an artist that represented both the old masters, but also the new modern era of Spanish painting and art. His romantic paintings are reminiscent of greats like Picasso, but he also shows us things like loneliness, fear, and alienation, and it is these works that are said to give us an insight into the mind of the artist. It is said that Francisco began experiencing difficulties both physically and mentally. These symptoms are said to include things like hearing voices, losing balance, progressive deafness, but at the same time experiencing tinnitus. There are many people who, using these symptoms, have tried to diagnose the late great artist, but it is unlikely that we may ever know exactly what was plaguing him during his life. In our number 5 spot today we have The Anguished Man. This is actually a painting that, while we know the story behind it, the person who created it remains a mystery. The painting itself depicts exactly what the name would suggest, a man looking like he is in great pain and suffering. The painting is apparently made of a mix of paint and blood, and it is said that the creator ended up taking his own life after making it. While this painting has reached a level of fame because of the fact that the current owner of it claims that it is haunted, the story behind it seems to be all too common for artists. The art itself is definitely a representation of a dark state of mind. In our number 4 spot today we have Edvard Munch. Most famous for the incredibly iconic image of the Scream, Edvard is known for his avant-garde style. It is said that the idea for the image came to him when he was out for a walk during the sunset on a fjord overlooking Oslo. He is said to have explained that as the sun set, it turned the sky blood red. In response to this scene, he said, quote, "I stood there trembling with anxiety, and I sensed an endless scream passing through nature." The painting is said to be an example or representation of human anxiety in the modern world, which it seems as though the artist was quite familiar with. Perhaps this is why the image is so universal and well revered, because it's something that so many people can relate to, whether consciously or not. It is said that the older Edvard got, the more his anxiety had a hold on him and began creeping into his life and manifesting in different ways. It is said that he suffered from anxiety, but that he also had hallucinations. He had terrifying nightmares and even visions of macabre situations, which can certainly be seen in his art. While at one point he did seek treatment and help for his struggles, and it did help in some ways, he also wrote in his diary, quote, "My fear of life is necessary to me, as is my illness. They are indistinguishable from me, and their destruction would destroy my art." In our number 3 spot today we have William Uttermohlen. The story of this artist directly relates to his struggle and battle with Alzheimer's. In 1995, William was diagnosed with a disease, which is a degenerative disease that affects memory loss and other cognitive abilities. It also targets the part of our brain that we use for visualizing things, which is important to William's story. William is best known for a series of self-portraits he created as his disease progressed. William's self-portraits obviously reflect a lot of what is going on in his mind during some of the last years of his life, and because of how it affected his brain, we can see how different the paintings get throughout the years. This series of paintings is actually sometimes used as study material for medical students because it does such a wonderful job at portraying something that can't always be understood fully with just words. I think William left the world with something very sad, but also beautiful, poignant, and very important. In our number 2 spot today we have Nicolas de Staël. During the 1950s, Nicolas rose to be quite an influential artist of his generation, and he produced work that has gone on to create quite a legacy for himself. He is known for painting classic landscapes in a highly abstract way, although his art later in life would focus on more traditional French imagery. It is said that throughout his life he often suffered through bouts of depression, and it was an ongoing struggle for him. It is said that he even moved to the south of France in search of peace and tranquility, but sadly this wasn't enough. It is said that after a negative meeting with an art critic, Nicolas decided that he simply just couldn't deal with his struggles anymore and that he had had enough with his life. This led to him sadly taking his own life. In our number 1 spot today we have Vincent van Gogh. Van Gogh is likely the most famous example of an artist that suffered with their mental illness, although as evidenced by this list, there truly is no shortage of suffering artists. Vincent is said to have struggled with both anxiety and depression in his life, and at one point he even wrote, "I put my heart and my soul into my work and lost my mind in the process." Van Gogh's work is so iconic and influential to modern art, and he is one of art's most iconic figures, but despite this success, success and talent, he was struggling greatly. Not just mentally, but he was also not commercially successful during his life. I mean, one of the most famous stories of him is how he cut off a portion of his own ear with a razor. What was a crazy story that went around the schoolyard is a very clear example of someone who needs help. Van Gogh tragically died at the age of 37 after taking his own life. After his passing is when he became the household name that he is now. His works, although they can show a tortured mind, also show immense talent and brilliance.